who is the sponsor of this legislation.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the chairman. 2 years ago, I met with a constituent who was concerned about the effects of unfunded EPA mandates on his water and sewer bills. He wanted to know why Congress doesn't vote on new regulations. This simple question inspired the legislation that we're considering today, and it also begs a broader question. Who should be accountable to the American people for major laws with which they are forced to comply? Since the New Deal, every Congress has delegated more of its constitutional lawmaking authority to unelected bureaucrats and administrative agencies through vaguely written laws. This is an abdication of Congress's constitutional responsibility to write the laws. This practice of excessive delegation of legislative powers to the executive branch allows members of Congress to take credit for the benefits of a law it has passed and then blame federal agencies for the costs and requirements of regulations authorized by the same legislation. Members of Congress are never required to support, oppose, or otherwise contribute to federal regulations that are major and finalized under their watch. Even more troubling, this practice has enabled the executive branch to overstep the intent of Congress and legislate through regulation based on broad authorities previously given the agency. In recent years, we've seen examples of administrative agencies, regardless of party, going beyond their original grants of power to implement policies not approved by the People's Congress. In several cases, such as net neutrality rules and the regulation of carbon emissions, agencies are pursuing regulatory action after Congress has explicitly rejected the concept. In fact, administrative officials publicly proclaimed this strategy after the results of the 2010 elections, going around Congress by forcing their agenda through regulation. In February of last year, the New York Times quoted White House Communications Director Dan Pfeiffer as saying, in 2010, executive actions will also play a key role in advancing the administration's agenda. True to their word, the administration continues using regulations as an end around to Congress. The lack of congressional accountability for the regulatory process has allowed the regulatory state to grow almost unchecked for generations. Federal administrative agencies issued 3,271 new rules in 2010, or roughly 9 regulations per day. These regulations have a profound impact on our economy. The Small Business Administration estimated that regulations cost the American economy $1.75 trillion in 2008, and that's nearly twice the amount of individual income taxes paid in this country that year. Small businesses spend an estimated $10,500 per employee to comply with federal rules, a considerable burden on the private sector's ability to create jobs at a time of continued economic struggles. Today we can choose to continue on this path, or we can vote to restore our constitutional duty to make law and be held accountable for the details. The REINS Act effectively constrains the delegation of congressional authority by limiting the size and scope of rulemaking permission. Once major rules are drafted and finalized by an agency, the REINS Act would require Congress to hold an up or down vote on any major regulation. Major regulations are those with an annual economic impact of more than $100 million as determined by the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. The President would also have to sign the resolution before it could be enforced on the American people, job creators, or state and local governments. Every major regulation would be voted on within 70 legislative days. The REINS Act was specifically written not to unnecessarily hold up the regulatory process. Rather, the bill prevents REINS resolutions from being filibustered in the Senate. The point of the REINS Act is simply accountability. Each congressman must take a stand and be accountable for regulations that cost our citizenry $100 million or more annually. No longer would Congress be able to avoid accountability by writing vague laws, requiring the benefits up front, and leaving the unpopular or costly elements to the bureaucrats who will write those elements of the law at some later date. Whether or not Congress approves a particular regulation, there will be clearly an accountable vote on the subject that the American people can see and judge for themselves. This ensures the greatest regulatory burdens on our economy are necessary to promote the public welfare rather than simply sprouting from the minds of unelected bureaucrats. The bill's name as a metaphor for the reins on a horse is fitting. The purpose of reins is not to keep a horse at a standstill. Reins are a tool to ensure the horse knows what is expected of him and is acting according to the intent and will of the rider. Likewise, the REINS Act would not stop the regulatory process. It would improve the regulatory process by ensuring that new major rules match the intent of Congress and the will of the American people. The REINS Act would foster greater upfront cooperation between agencies and future Congresses, resulting in better written legislation and regulation. With greater accountability, transparency, Regulatory agencies will have no choice but to write regulations that reflect the need for sensible standards and take into account the impact regulations have on American businesses and families. Similarly, agencies would no longer be able to bypass Congress with regulations that don't match congressional intent or go too far. Not all regulations are bad. Many provide needed public safeguards, help to keep the American people safe, and maintain a level playing field for businesses to compete. And so good regulations would be approved by future Congresses, and those that could not withstand the public scrutiny of a vote in Congress would not. A common-sense regulatory system with appropriate checks and balances on the most economically significant rules will help to revive our stagnant economy and give more businesses the ability to hire, thanks to a better sense of stability and what to expect from Washington going forward. The question we're asked today is, in effect, the same I was asked by my constituent in August of 2009. Who should be accountable for the rules and regulations that have the greatest economic impact on our economy? My answer is the Congress. In an era of high unemployment, Congress can no longer avoid its responsibility to the American people for the regulatory burden. Passing the REINS Act today would be a major step forward in returning to a constitutional, responsible legislative and regulatory framework. I want to thank Judiciary Chairman Lamar Smith for his countless efforts on behalf of the REINS Act and his leadership, as well as the more than 200 co-sponsors of this bill in the House. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back my time.